So welcome to our first Neapolitan of the Charleston Conference, or Neapolitan session, working in partnership to support quality research with Jayne Marks, who's the VP of Global Publishing for Wolters Kluwer. We were very, very pleased when we asked Jayne to do this session, and she agreed, and had some great sessions, some great planning sessions, and I think you're really going to enjoy listening to Jayne's thoughts on how publishers and librarians can collaborate to create top quality research. So you're not here to talk. I'm Ed Colleran, by the way, of Triumvirate Content Consultants, but I'm just here to keep the peace. We will, after about a half hour, we'll open it up for questions. But right now I'd like to introduce to you again Jayne Marks, VP Global Publishing, Wolters Kluwer.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a little vertically challenged, so I think I'm a bit hidden behind the computer here. And how's the microphone? Can you hear me at the back okay?
It's not working.
It's not working? Okay.
That's my voice.
Aha. Let's try and see if we can turn it on. It seems to be on. Can you hear me at the back okay? Maybe if I take it out. You know, if the worst comes to the worst, I'll use that one. It's on? Can you hear me all right?
Oh,
maybe I could pull this towards me, maybe. You want me to do that?
Yeah, it's probably too far.
Okay. It won't turn down anymore, so. Okay, there we go. How's that? Can you hear me okay now? No? No, nobody. Sounds like it's on, but not turned up very much. I mean, I could.
Is this one working?
Try that one?
Does this work?
Okay.
Do you mind holding?
No. Okay, how's that? Better? All right. We'll ignore this one. I don't think I can move it because I think it's all wired in here. So, before I get started, first of all, I should say thank you so much, Ed, for inviting me here and having me come and talk at the Charleston Conference. I have to say this is my absolute favorite meeting of the year. I really enjoy it. It's so great to come and meet with people who really get what we do, all of us, the publishers and librarians working together, talking about real issues. That's what I really like. I have been in charge. I don't know if I should say this first or I should ask my question first. Okay, I'm going to ask my question first. How many in this room, and I want you to be really honest, think that publishers are just after building paywalls and making money? Come on. 3 of you? Okay. All right, so I'm in for an easy ride. No, I know that is a lot of the public perception of what publishers do today. I have been in journal publishing now. I did admit to my colleagues last night, I've been in journal publishing 35 years. I've tried a couple of times to get out. I keep being drawn back in. I love publishing. I love academic publishing. I'm now in medical publishing, so I work exclusively in the medical space. And I'm very passionate about this space. But I know that we have a huge image issue. So what I want to do today is to share with you some of my thoughts about how really at the grassroots, on the ground, we work together really well, and we support our community of interest. So I don't know how many of you were at James Neal's session just a little while ago. He said 2 things that really struck me. One I completely agree with, and the other one I completely disagree with. So they might surprise you. The first one that I agree with is he said, we are in a state of constant change. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Whether you're in publishing or academia or librarianship, everywhere, so much is changing so fast that really change is the new normal. We have to get used to that. But the other thing he said was, right at the beginning, he said, the community of interest between publishers and librarians is narrow. I'm not sure I could really agree with that, because everything that we do in publishing space is for your patrons. That's what we do it for. We do it for your patrons to make their work out there in the world, to help validate their work, to disseminate their work, to make sure that it's preserved long term. And I hope that's, in those senses, we have the same community of interest that you do. So having set that as my context, I want to talk through, well, let me start with my agenda here. Talking a little bit about actually creating and delivering that quality of research to the finished product, and then how do we get it out to the widest possible audience? And what do we bring to the table? What do you bring to the table? How do we work together? And what I would really like at the end of this session, after I've given my thoughts, is to hear your thoughts on what we could do more of and how we can help each other better. So let's start with delivering quality research. And let's start with the authors. The authors are the most important people that we work with in terms of the scholarly research continuum. The authors, the researchers, are the people that we need to support the most. And I think the other thing that James Neal said that I completely agree with is the complexity that researchers are facing today in terms of accessing and publishing their work is really, really complex and hard. And I think the thing where we work best together, and we do a lot of, certainly we do a lot of, I know you do a lot of, is training information. Making sure particularly that young authors, as they come into the scholarly communication process, understand the complexities, understand the choices. There are lots of choices out there. So we deliver webinars. We deliver a lot of online information resources. In-person training at conferences, a lot of what my publishers do who manage journals in our organization, when we go to meetings of our society partners, they'll run sessions on how to get published, how to make sure your work is in the best possible state, where to go and get help if you need help in how to publish your work. Then we provide support services. I'm sure you do the same thing too. We provide language editing. There are some great resources out there, one of which we partner with, I know other publishers partner with the same, that you can point authors to who maybe haven't published before, or their English is not their first language, and maybe even the scholarly process is different in their country, and they need help in understanding what makes a good piece of research and a good publishable paper. We provide training courses on the ground in multiple countries to help people to do that. And in fact, we have an organization that's part of us in India that supports emerging markets publishing. And if you imagine you are a Nigerian physician, you're doing work on the ground in Nigeria, you want to publish a clinical study that you've done, it's not going to be of interest to a Western journal where the American Journal of, I don't know, say ophthalmology, has all of the tools and equipment you can possibly imagine to treat that patient. That Nigerian ophthalmologist won't have those. So you need to be able to understand and to put that in context of the work that he's working in. But the peer review has to be good. And the process has to be the same, it just has to be in context. So we provide training courses for authors in those countries. We provide training courses for new editors who've perhaps just been tapped on the shoulder and said, you're going to be the editor of the new journal of Nigerian Journal of Ophthalmology, and they have no idea what to do. So we provide a lot of those resources, training. There's some great collaborative resources across publishers and librarians to help do that. And then mentoring young researchers. We put in each of the publishing associations, there are mentoring programs for young publishers. I know there are mentoring programs in a number of different areas for young researchers. A number of our partner societies who own the journals that we publish have mentoring programs for young peer reviewers, for example. There might be a special program that they're able to sign up for, and they can learn how to do peer review. It's not something you just grow up learning how to do. So those kinds of, it's all about training, and it's all about helping us to get to better authors, because better authors definitely gives us higher quality of research. So I wanted to put this up as an example. There are lots and lots of examples out there, but I found this one. I thought this was great. Here there is links to all kinds of resources that the library can, this is a library site that this librarian has put together to show authors where to go. And more importantly, down here, where not to go. What are journals that perhaps they should be a little bit more careful of? Because I think that's one of the things that we can work together to do, is to really help authors to understand when perhaps that offer of a publication isn't quite what they expect it to be. So that's the other thing we can do. We can help authors navigate this maze of where to publish. So we've helped them get their paper into a publishable format. Where are they going to publish it? What is most important to them? Is it prestige? Is it speed? Do they want open access? Is open access important to them? And how is that going to help them? All of those things, I think, can help. Together we can help researchers, particularly young researchers who are publishing their early papers, to understand what the options are, where they should go for. Publishing your first paper in Nature or Science is probably shooting for the moon. It's probably not going to happen. So where do you start? Where do you want to put your paper? And when is it really important to get the speed, and where do you go? There are journals that specialize in almost every area of this, particularly including open access, and therefore helping authors to know where to go, to navigate that landscape, and to understand the benefits, the upsides and the downsides of that, I think is really important. If you are a tenured professor publishing your 200th paper, you're unlikely to be worried perhaps about whether or not the journal has an impact factor. Maybe you just want speed. Maybe you just want to get that out in the market, and you know that you can get it into a journal that's going to get it out fast. But if you're an author on the tenure track, getting into the right journals, because that's the system we work in, whether we like it or not, is important to them. The last question, I think, is really important, and is the journal authentic? I want to show you an example that came up. This is a real example that came up very recently. So the editor of this journal, or this author rather, got this email. Would you like to submit in plastic and reconstructive surgery? The email goes on. This is the sort of follow-up. You notice that by the time it gets into the email, it says Gavin Journal of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, but the headline is Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. Then you go to the website, and the website is suddenly Plastic Surgery and Modern Techniques. So quite what happened there. The real journal is this one, and this is one we publish. And the society came to us and said, what do we do? There's this plastic and reconstructive surgery journal out there that's not ours and is masquerading as our journal. And I cannot tell you how many times we have people come to us day in, day out saying, I found the journal of this or the journal of that is pretending to be our journal. They're very clever. They have covers that look like the covers of the journals. They present themselves in very similar ways, and they do things like this with the email. It is very hard, it's very easy, rather, should I say, to be taken in by some of these if you're new into the to the field. And I think this is an area where we need to do more to help people understand when an offer to publish is really just a Nigerian princess email, and they should avoid it. There's a wealth of difference between pure predatory publishing and sort of the broad range of open access journals. There's lots and lots of different journals in between, but there are clearly predatory practices out there that we can help protect our authors from, and I think we can work together on that. And I wanted to, I don't know, how many of you have heard of the Coalition for Responsible Publication Resources? Oh, good, somebody's heard of them. So this, I just highlight here, it's a conglomeration of actually Paul Samalek from the Editage company, working with a group of publishers at the moment to try and put together some resources that really will help people understand when predatory publishing is happening, whether it's bad practices in peer review, whether it's bad practices potentially in submission, but also just journals masquerading as journals that really are not bona fide journals. So I think this is an area where we definitely can work together more on. Peer review is really important, and I'm going to go through these roles. I'm sure you know these roles as well as I do, but they are complex. They've actually become, in some ways, more complex. Authors, clearly, they write their paper, they write up their results, they submit their paper. I've put under here, interestingly, that archives their paper, because many of the funders put the responsibility for the archiving on the author. But I suspect that many of us in this room would say, actually, it's the librarian that archives it. Or publishers would say, well, actually, we're responsible for depositing that paper when it's ready. So I think archiving the paper is somewhat of a shared responsibility between all of us. Manages data is an interesting one, and I want to come back to that one later. The editor sets the editorial policy, whatever that journal's editorial policy might be, appoints an editorial board to help him or her to do their job. And it might not just be one editor, it might be multiple editors. They choose the reviewers, and more generally speaking, they will make the final decision, and at the very least, they will make the final decision on any potentially controversial papers. The editorial board, on the other hand, they provide a lot of support. They usually do a lot of the reviewing, and they do a lot of promoting of the journal and helping to get authors to come in. Sometimes different editorial boards will be split into different subject areas, and certain sort of sub-editors or groups will take different responsibilities. Reviewers are, they're so crucial, and this is an area where we don't, in many cases, we don't do enough to support editors and reviewers in their work. It is really a crucial role of the reviewer to assess the accuracy, to make sure that the data that is in the paper supports the conclusions, and puts that context of, or the content of what's being published in the context of the broader world, and then matches that to the journal's policies, whatever that journal might be. So it might be a highly selective journal, it might be a broad-based journal, whatever it is, or they may have published an article on the same topic last month, in which case they might not be so interested. So that's the reviewer's role. What does the publisher do? They provide systems and infrastructure to manage this process in terms of the technology. They, in most cases, fund the editorial office, and the editor might well have an entire team of people that backs him or her up in terms of managing this process, depending on the size of the journal. And providing support in terms of training on how to use the system, bug fixing when the system goes wrong, training, support for the authors in terms of doing that. And more, I think publishers are finding ways to help thank reviewers for what they're doing. Maybe sometimes offering access to content. In our world, we offer reviewers CME credits, which is particularly for somebody trying to amass their credits for the end of the year. It's important to them to get those CME credits. So finding ways to help this process, support this process, is something we can definitely work together on. Archiving is incredibly important. I know it's the key role of the librarian to make sure that archiving happens, but I think it's something that we share in making sure that it works. There are so many different archiving policies out there. Funders have different policies on how things are published, where they're deposited. It is amazingly complex, I'm sure from your perspective, but certainly from a publisher perspective, with papers coming in from all over the world under many, many different funder mandates. It's bewildering to keep up with it. We provide, between us, you provide the institutional repositories, we provide the help in terms of depositing in archives, depositing directly into a number of funded repositories, including PubMed Central is probably the most important one. So in that sense, actually making sure that that process happens and that we support the authors together and making sure that process happens is important. I've put up here creating and managing a data management plan. We've spent a lot of time scratching our heads within Wolters Kluwer on what does data mean in terms of how do we support it within the publishing process. And this is a personal view from mine. It's not necessarily a WK view. I think we're still thinking about it. I don't think it's the publisher's role to preserve the data. I think there are services out there that do that. I think I don't know if it's the librarian's role to manage the data and the data curation and the data sort of storage going forward. I'd be really interested to hear your view. Is it the role of, for example, the NIH? Is that the place where data should be deposited and curated? I think having a data management plan is a really good idea. How that happens is something that I'm very interested in and still not convinced that we have all the answers at all. And then the last thing, providing dark archiving services. I think every publisher deposits their content into one or more of the archiving repositories to make sure that we have that long-term preservation. And most importantly, the long-term preservation of the version of record, so that as the record evolves, as authors come back and add or change or amend their paper, maybe not amend, but add to it more information, then we need to make sure that all of that is captured and captured for the long term. So that's how we get the papers. Now, how do we get it out to the world? How do we get it in the hands of people who need it? Finding content. This poor man's got his head in a haystack. James Neal was absolutely right. Trying to find the right content in today's world is incredibly difficult. Of course, everybody starts with Google Scholar, you hope, or Google. You hope they go on to the library services, use the discovery services. Often they use social sharing networks to find the paper they're looking for or to just find papers. I think there are different ways of searching for something depending on whether the researcher knows what they are looking for or are just trying to look at the landscape of maybe a new area they want to research. So I think there's a lot of different ways to search for content, and not sure we've all quite got it right yet, but I think there are a lot of tools out there. I think we need to make sure that researchers on the ground know how the different tools work and how they can use them more effectively. How do we help with this process? Metadata consistency, and did I see Todd come in the room? Todd Carpenter? He's, if he's not here, he certainly is really keen on metadata and standards. And that's something that we as an industry, in the publishing industry, have to work really, really hard to maintain, because if we don't have consistent standards, then you can't pull that content into your discovery services or other systems that you want to work on. So metadata consistency and curation and updating content. So every time a new metadata standard comes out, I understand there's a new JATS. First of all, we had to amend everything to take in JATS. Now there's a new JATS, which is the DTD format. So everything has to change. The standards in the industry are crucial. ORCID for understanding who the researcher is and being able to dedupe researchers. FundRef, so that you can, as a funder, actually understand where the research that you have funded finally gets published. The DOI, just the basic DOI, is critical, and then how we use the DOI and linking through Crossref and Chorus. How many of you are aware of the Chorus initiative? Hopefully most of you. Chorus uses a lot of these standards to help the different funders to actually get to the papers that they have helped to fund. So all of those things, I think, together will continue to evolve. I think we need to do a lot more of that, and it's something we absolutely have to work on together to make sure that we're really marching in the same direction. And then I mentioned earlier the version of record. I think this is really important, and I think it often gets forgotten in the myriad ways that people can get to content. Maybe I'm more sensitive to it because in health I think it's really important that the version of record is the one that a clinician might use to decide to change their practice. And they need to know whether there have been any updates to that version of record. So, discovery services. I'm sure there are more than one other sessions in. I definitely know there's at least one other session at this meeting, and there's usually multiple on discovery services. It is pretty much a space odyssey. There is so much content out there, and there are a number of different discovery services all trying to help you and us and our patrons, our joint patrons, our readers, get to content they need. We need to make sure that these solutions are workable, usable, they're transparent, that we partner with them. and that they're trusted, for example. It's really important that a discovery service gives you access to everything and doesn't imply any kind of preference on pulling anybody's content to the top. It has to be what the researcher is trying to find. Linking and data, I mean, how are we going to then evolve discovery services to take in all these data repositories that are going to be out there? I can't imagine what that's going to be like. So actually, then providing metrics and providing measures back to the library about what that content is that's being used. It was interesting that James Neal said, I'm not going to pay for anything that my patrons don't use. I completely understand that. How do we make sure that when a library patron needs some content that you have, that they don't go out to Sci-Hub, for example, to go and get it because it's easier? How do we make sure that together we work to make it easy to get to content? And I think that's something that we're not doing as well today as we could be. So really that comes down to the last point. How do we get content together? How do we make sure that content gets into the hands of the users in their workflow? And that's why I do completely agree with James Neal when he says it's workflow tools that are important. And I think it's something that publishers are focused on. I'm sure it's something that you as librarians are focused on as well. So here's a couple of examples. You've all seen different discovery services. We actually just launched one this year for the hospital space because many hospitals don't even have a library. The hospitals who don't have a library really need some way of pulling all their content together. So there are different interfaces available for different markets. So then how do we measure? How do we measure the quality and the usage of the content that we all publish? It is as important to us to know that the content that we're publishing is being used. It's of no interest to me to publish reams and reams of articles that nobody ever reads. The important thing is to get those articles out there and to make sure they're being used. There's lots of ways to do that. We've all know Scopus, ISI, Altmetrics. We need to make sure that our users and, dare I say, that maybe even senior people within publishing and senior people within the academic sector can understand what these metrics mean, and most importantly, understand what they don't mean. Just because something has an impact factor, does that mean that, if the usage in your library is low, is that good or bad? If one person gets to the article they really need to read, and maybe it has a high altmetric score, is that good or bad? I think this is something that we haven't figured out yet. I think we're still learning about how to navigate this sort of maze of different analytics that are coming back to us. And I think we need to understand how these things are telling us how our patrons want to use the content that we make available to them. I want to talk a little bit about marketing, because that's something that the publishers do, and it's very focused these days on getting the content to the right people. It's much, much more difficult today than it used to be. And this is a slide that I borrowed from my colleague who heads up our marketing department. And he's really talking about how marketing has evolved. Marketing is no longer putting your message down on a piece of paper and mailing it to somebody. We're long past that. So people working in our marketing department have to have these kinds of skills or these kinds of tools to be able to do their jobs better. Analytics, first and foremost, is critical. I do not want to send anybody an email that is of no interest to them, because that's wasting their time, it's wasting our time. So really understanding the relevance of the content that you have, the message you have to the audience is critical. And only by using analytics can you figure that out. Social media, I don't need to tell this audience that social media is a really important method of communication, and how we can use that effectively and reasonably to get, again, content being discussed out there in the market is important. Once you have all this data back, can we use data visualization more to actually be able to show us what is important, what's happening in the content that we're publishing and that we're accessing? Marketing people don't have to be just creative anymore. They have to have technical skills, or at least within your team, as in the next one, you have to have technical people as well as people who are good and creative. It has to be a team approach today. This one's interesting. I've never heard of newsjacking. But actually taking advantage of when something is in the news, of saying, hey, I know this is in the news today, but here in this academic environment, we have some fantastic content that really sets the context of the news that you're reading today. So, I mean, I'm sure as librarians, you've had people come in and say, I've heard about the Zika virus, well, probably not recently, but maybe when it first came out. Can you tell me about it? Now, if we as publishers can get ahead of that and give you content sets, or give our readers content sets and links to information that's really important to them, I think that's going to, that's something that we can do as a service, and I think it's going to be very much more helpful putting information in the hands of people who need it. And soft skills. I mean, I think everybody needs that, but here, most definitely within a marketing team today, they have to be able to work well together. So that's, in that sense, we use all of those skills to try and get the right information out to the right people. So, to sum up, I don't know how I'm doing for time. A little bit over. So, this is my summary slide, really. We can and we do work together to support authors. They are our community of interest, and I think we already provide them information, training, guidance. We can do more. And we're always interested in hearing from our library partners on what more we can do there. Preserving and nurturing peer review is critical. Lots and lots of much smarter people than I talk about whether or not peer review is no longer needed, can be superseded. As far as I can see today, peer review is critical at being able to say, this paper is something you can trust. And let me tell you, in the medical field, you want to be able to look a physician in the eye and say, this paper is something you can trust. Because if they're going to go out tomorrow and do something different with a patient, you want to be sure that paper is right. I do think we need to make sure that we work together to support our readers and patrons, to be aware of what information is out there and what information is trusted information, and maybe where they should be a little more careful. And lastly, I would just leave with this thought, when I have one more thought, but leave with this, that we are in a complex and dynamic environment. Things are changing very fast, and we have to continue to do what we are over these 3 days, talking to each other in detail about the systems we have, the processes we have, the challenges we face, to make sure that we can make our patrons and our customers' lives better. I'm going to leave you with one last thought, particularly as the editor of this book is in the room. This is a shameless plug for a new book that's coming out towards the end of this month. It's all about academic publishing. It's written for librarians, very conversational style. I should probably own up to the fact that I have a chapter in this book. But if you're interested, it's published by Mission Bell Media, and it's coming out at the end of November. I highly recommend it, of course, because I'm biased. So, questions? There's a microphone at the front, if anybody wants to come and ask questions. And I'm very happy with controversial questions, if anybody wants to ask one. Any thoughts? I'll ask you all one question. Any thoughts on that issue of data? And who and how are we going to support our authors in managing their data? Sorry, were you coming to, if you want to ask a different question, please do. Okay, please do, please do. Okay.
So you were talking about the importance, specifically relating to doctors in Nigeria and getting information. Can you hear me? Oh, God, yeah. Does that matter? So my name is Samantha Kennedy, and I'm actually a public services librarian. So, and I deal a lot now with faculty and our institutional repository. So I was just wondering, you keep talking about doctors in Nigeria and they can't get access to current information. Wouldn't open access solve some of those problems? And I'm always interested to know what major publishers' opinions on open access, what they are, and what you think, and if you're heading that way, because a lot of those issues are solved by open access publishing and creating this platform for not just doctors in Nigeria, but maybe people in the United States who don't have access
Absolutely.
to this type of information?
Great question. So the example I gave of the Nigerian Journal of Ophthalmology, it's actually an open access publication. And interestingly, that one is, it's published by a small unit that we have in India called Medno. And that model is that there's no cost to the author and there's no cost to the reader. The cost of that process, which is as low cost as we can get it, is covered by the institution that owns the journal. In that case, I think it's a government department in Nigeria. So I think, yes, open access is a way to go, and it definitely has its role. I think there's also Research for Life, and I think most publishers, if not all publishers, provide their content through Research for Life databases into countries where they really cannot afford to buy content. So that route is another route, particularly into Africa, for readers to be able to get the content they want. As far as other open access is concerned, we are pretty agnostic. Certainly in Wolters Kluwer, we're fairly agnostic about how authors want to publish their paper. If they want to publish it open access in one of our journals or in one of our pure open access journals, there are options available to them to do that. Yeah. Oh, of course. I'd love to.
So I'm Pat Reek. Pat Reeks from the University of Florida. I want to go back to the data management question and sort of a question for the group, because we've recently hired a data management librarian and we're really focusing on that as a core piece of what the libraries need to be driving forward on our campus. So I'm kind of curious how many other people are doing that and see the libraries as the person, the organization on campus that should drive that.
Okay, let's do a quick straw poll then. First of all, the libraries in the room, librarians in the room, how many of you have a data manager or have a plan to have a data manager? Well, that's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. So of the publishers in the room, how many of you offer a data management service? One. So I think you've got the answer there. I think it's leaning towards, unless, of course, the publisher is focused on one core subject area, I think then that can help. Certainly when we were looking at it from the point of view of healthcare space, first of all, you have the problem of HIPAA compliance and stripping out all of the patient data. And then secondly, different medical disciplines want to capture different data sets. So if you're a surgeon or you're a neurologist, you want to capture different things. And then it starts to blow your mind very quickly. So if librarians are taking that on, we are thrilled and we're happy to help you in any way we can, so long as it's your responsibility. Any other questions?
Rob Thiessen, University of Calgary. I just wanted to ask about versioning. You had a slide where you wanted to be, you were concerned that researchers get the most recent version. So how do you, if you pre-pub versus post-pub, a post-pub article that's in the journal's layout versus something that happens to be in Microsoft Word and is exactly the same language, but it doesn't look for some reason as professional. Do you have any comments on that?
It's very hard. There have been a number of different attempts to give different versions names, and I cannot remember the initiative. I don't know if any of the publishers in the room can remember the name of the initiative, but there was an attempt to give each, whether it's a preprint or a author-submitted manuscript, et cetera, they all had a sort of a name and a tag, if you like, so that you knew exactly what you were looking at. There is an initiative to have a stamp on it to say this is the version of record, so that you know you're reading the version of record. A few publishers have implemented that sort of tag, that metadata tag, and it's like a little flag that goes on the paper. It is really hard to know, once an article is out there, it's really hard to know which version you're looking at, which is why I think always including a DOI in whatever version of the paper it is, then you can always get back to the version of record, because the version of record needs to be the one that has all of the added links or context or edits that the author wants to add later on. Or if it's retracted, it's important, if you follow the DOI and there's a retraction statement in there as well, that could be important to know. So I think the key to that is probably making sure that any version of a manuscript keeps the DOI, and then you have a link back to where you need to go. Does that help? Any other questions? Do we have any? We are almost out of time anyway. Okay. Well, thank you very much.